Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like a part of you went missing? Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. A silence that wrapped itself around your chest. A guilt that was never yours to carry. A fatigue. That sleep couldn't fix. You think it's just exhaustion. You think it's just you being too sensitive, but what if it isn't? What if that weight you're carrying doesn't even belong to you? Carl Jung didn't just study the human mind. He exposed the unseen forces that govern it, and what he discovered is terrifying in its simplicity. Most people are not guided by awareness. They are moved by shadows they cannot see. These people walk beside you. They smile, they love, they suffer. And without knowing it, they drain you. They don't do it with malice. They do it unconsciously. And that's precisely what makes them dangerous, because when a person is blind to their own darkness, that darkness doesn't just vanish. It seeks a host, a vessel, someone else to carry what they refuse to see. That someone is often you. Think about it. That friend who always calls you in crisis, but never truly hears you. That partner who makes you feel like their emotions are your responsibility. That relative who leaves you feeling guilty, even when you've done nothing wrong. You try to help. You try to be supportive. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to disappear, and you don't even realize it's happening because it doesn't look like abuse. It looks like empathy. It sounds like care. It feels like love. But Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What if the fate you've been living isn't yours? What if someone else's unresolved pain, someone else's fear, shame, envy has latched onto you? Right now, without your awareness, you may be carrying fragments of other people's psychic debris. Not because you're weak, but because you're open. And that openness, that radiant human capacity to feel, has become a portal. A portal for the unconscious of other to invade your soul. In the next part, we'll go deeper. We'll expose the first type of person Jung warned us about, someone who drains not with intent, but through projection. The unconscious manipulator. But before we continue, let me know if this opening resonates with the tone, depth, and emotional cadence you're looking for. Before continuing with the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more videos like this when they are released. That devours, they don't scream, they don't threaten, they don't even seem dangerous. In fact, at first they often appear delicate, wounded, real. They confide in you, cry with you, call you the only one who understands. And a part of you lights up, because finally someone needs you, but that's exactly how it begins, not with control. With closeness. Carl Jung called it projection, the unconscious act of placing one's denied feelings onto someone else. And the most seductive projections are not the ones hurled in anger. They're the ones cloaked in dependence. You think you're supporting a friend. What you're really doing is carrying a part of them they refuse to face. At first it's subtle. They blame others for their sadness. They accuse the world of being unfair. They gently suggest you could have done more, listened more, loved better. And without realizing it, you start to question yourself. Maybe I was insensitive. Maybe I should have called sooner. Maybe I'm the one who's toxic. But here's the truth. You've just entered a psychic loop, one that isn't even yours. Because what the unconscious manipulator does is not intentional. That's what makes it so devastating. They're not lying. They genuinely believe you caused their suffering because their psyche has turned you into a mirror, not of who you are, but of what they cannot face within themselves. Jung wrote, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will encounter as fate." And sometimes fate comes with a smile. The unconscious manipulator is not a villain. They're a person haunted by fragmented emotions, buried memories, abandoned inner children. But instead of healing those wounds, they hand them to you and call it love. They'll ask for support, then resent you when you give it. They'll beg for closeness, then accuse you of suffocating them. They'll need you, but only as long as you play the role they've unconsciously cast you in. Maybe it's the savior, maybe it's the villain, maybe it's the abandoner. Whichever role it is, it's not you. But here's the trap. Because they're so emotionally intense, so fragile and raw. You begin to believe you're the one who's stronger, that you're helping, healing, holding space. But what you're really doing is slowly drowning in a pool that was never yours to swim in, and the more you try to help them, the more you betray yourself. Jung warned that projection creates a psychic blindness, where others stop seeing you as a person and only see the parts of themselves they've buried. And when someone projects onto you long enough, you stop seeing yourself too. You become their emotional filter, their therapist, their crutch, their mirror, and eventually, when you can't carry them anymore, they will say you abandoned them. They will say you changed. They will say you're just like all the rest, but none of that is true. What's true is this: you were never meant to carry a burden that isn't yours. So, how do you break free? Jung's answer was simple but radical. Awareness. Start asking the question, is what I'm feeling truly mine? If the answer is no, you've already found the exit, because the unconscious manipulator doesn't invade through violence. They enter through empathy, through your desire to care, to fix, to help. But you were not put on this earth to bleed for other people's healing, and if this is starting to resonate, then you're ready for the next mask. Because while the unconscious manipulator projects, the next type performs. They don't ask for your help, they ask for your admiration, but behind their perfect smile lies a soul suffocating under the weight of the persona, and it's time we unmask it. They never raise their voice, they never lose control. They say all the right things at all the right times, and still, something feels off. You can't quite explain it. They're polite, reliable, even charming. But after every interaction, you feel a strange emptiness, like you were just talking to a beautifully constructed mask, because you were. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to meet the expectations of society. And while we all have one, some people become nothing but that mask. They don't just use the persona, they become it. And in doing so, they trade their soul for acceptance. They learn how to perform, not to deceive, but to survive. They suppress what's raw, inconvenient, or vulnerable. They become efficient, respected, admirable, but dead inside. And worse, their mask becomes a mirror they hold up to you. You begin to wonder why you're the messy one, why you can't hold it together the way they do, why your emotions feel like a problem and their image feels like the solution. But it's not a solution, it's a trap, because the more someone identifies with their persona, the further they drift from their self. And when you stay too close to them, you start drifting too. Jung wrote, "The persona is what a person should appear to be, but is not. It is the costume of normality, the script of success, the illusion of control. But beneath the flawless surface lives a soul starving for realness. And that starvation becomes contagious. You start censoring your emotions. You second-guess your instincts. You avoid being too loud, too sad, too human, for fear of disrupting their pristine narrative. It's not that they silence you, it's that their entire existence pressures you into silence. And here's the brutal truth. They don't do this because they're manipulative. They do it because they're afraid. Afraid that if the mask ever slips, no one will love what's underneath, so they smile and posture and perform, not out of malice, but out of terror. The problem is that terror becomes your environment. You feel like you're walking on glass. Even joy feels rehearsed. Even pain must come in the right dosage, with the right face at the right time. And what dies in this environment is not your body, it's your spontaneity, your playfulness, your truth. Living near someone who has become their persona is like living in a theater. The lights are perfect, the costumes are flawless, but the script never changes. And you become another actor in their performance, a silent participant in their self-erasure. But Jung gave us a warning here. The greater the identification with the persona, the more repressed the shadow becomes. And that's where we're headed next. Because the mask doesn't hold forever. Eventually, what's buried comes back, with force. The more someone hides their true feelings, desires, or rage, the more violently it returns when the pressure breaks. And that is where we encounter one of the most volatile figures in Jung's psychological landscape, the owner of the repressed shadow. They are calm, they are composed, they are in control until they're not. One moment they're the image of maturity, the helpful friend, the reasonable leader, the emotionally stable partner. The next, they explode, in rage, in silence, in cold judgment, and you have no idea what you did wrong. Welcome to the world of the repressed shadow, where darkness doesn't come with red flags, but with white gloves. Carl Jung taught that every human being has a shadow, the rejected parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, not just our vices, but also our suppressed desires, our hidden talents, our unspoken needs. We push them away to stay likable, lovable, good, but the shadow doesn't die. It waits, and in the person who refuses to face it, it becomes something volatile, explosive. Jung wrote, "The shadow is everything that the individual refuses to acknowledge about themselves, and yet it is always there." And when you live near someone who carries this repressed shadow, you begin to feel it. Not in the words they say, but in the tension they carry. They judge others for being too emotional, because they've repressed their own emotions. They mock ambition, because they've buried their own desire to succeed. They can't stand weakness because they've disowned their own vulnerability. And you become the battlefield. You cry, and they go cold. You express joy, and they roll their eyes. You fail, and they correct you, not with compassion, but with quiet contempt. Not because they hate you, but because your aliveness awakens something in them they cannot bear to feel. They've spent years hiding from their shadow. Are you just by being yourself? Bring it to the surface, and that's when the explosions come, not always loud. Sometimes they arrive as cutting silence, passive-aggressive remarks, sarcastic dismissals, withdrawn affection. You start to shrink around them, not out of fear of who they are, but out of fear of who they might become, and if triggered, and in trying to keep the peace, you begin to abandon yourself. You hide your joy, your sadness, your spontaneity, just to avoid waking the beast. But the truth is, that beast is not you. It's not caused by you. It's theirs. It is the emotional lava beneath their mask. Years of rage, envy, desire, and shame, all shoved into the unconscious, until the unconscious starts to leak. Jung warned, the more the shadow is repressed, the more brutal its manifestation will be. And when that brutality arrives, you will likely be the one who pays for it. But here's the tragedy. These people aren't monsters. They're emotionally constipated souls, trying to survive a psychological war they've never named. And you can't win a war that isn't yours. So how do you protect yourself? By not confusing control with wholeness, by remembering that calm isn't always peace. Sometimes it's a dam about to burst. You can't heal someone's shadow by being its punching bag. And the longer you stay near someone repressing their truth, the more you begin to repress your own. But there's a twist in this journey, because sometimes the shadow doesn't hide behind perfection. Sometimes it hides behind morality, not as repression, but as righteousness. And that leads us straight into one of the most dangerous psychological archetypes Jung ever warned about, the moral controller. Not every executioner carries a sword. Some carry a Bible, a rulebook, a smile. They say it's for your own good. They tell you they're just being honest. They claim to stand for truth, for order, for what's right. But behind their eyes lives something else entirely. Guilt, shame, fear, and the desperate need to not look inward. This is the moral controller, a figure Carl Jung understood all too well. They speak the language of ethics. But their morality isn't rooted in awareness. It's rooted in projection. They are obsessed with your behavior, your choices, your desires, but never their own. They condemn what they secretly crave. They shame what they've repressed. They moralize, not to elevate you, but to protect the fragile illusion of their own superiority. Jung warned, the brighter the persona, the darker the shadow. And the moral controller. They've polished their persona into something almost blinding. They wear the costume of virtue, but their shadow follows closely behind. Furious, envious, starved, they don't seek truth. They seek control. Control over the world, control over others. control over their own chaos, which they cannot and will not face. And when you stand too close to them, you start to feel it. You start censoring your thoughts. You start second-guessing your instincts. You start feeling guilty just for being yourself. Suddenly, your freedom feels selfish. Your desire feels shameful. Your independence feels like rebellion. But none of that is true. What's happening is projection. They've taken the parts of themselves they cannot accept, desire, anger, ambition, rebellion, and cast them onto you. You become the sinner, the disappointment, the immoral one, not because of who you are, but because of what they refuse to admit they are. Jung explored this dynamic in his study of religious archetypes, especially the shadow relationship between Christ and the Antichrist. When someone believes they are embodying only the light, they blind themselves to the darkness they carry. And that darkness doesn't disappear. It just starts controlling others. That's the moral controller. They believe they're helping you, correcting you, saving you, educating you. But what they're really doing is turning your soul into a prison. Because they refuse to enter their own and the most dangerous part. They believe they are right. They weaponize goodness. They baptize guilt. They preach control and call it love. And the result? You start to feel dirty for wanting joy. You feel ashamed for choosing rest. You feel selfish for not living according to someone else's script. This is not morality. This is emotional colonization. You are not free. You are being shaped, not by truth, but by another person's fear of their own freedom. Jung called this one of the greatest obstacles to individuation, the process of becoming your whole integrated self. Because as long as you're living under someone else's moral spell, you will never hear your own soul. So how do you break free? You begin by asking, whose voice is this really? Is that guilt yours? Or was it installed in you by someone too afraid to face their own shadow? Once you identify the voice, you can silence it, not out of rebellion, but out of truth, because real morality doesn't demand submission. It invites self-awareness, and that brings us to an even deeper, more unpredictable archetype, not the one who moralizes, but the one who is possessed. By wounds so raw they override logic, time, even love. They don't judge you, they break you, without meaning to. They love you, and then they punish you. They open their heart, then shut down without warning. They tell you you're everything, and the next day, act like you're nothing. And you're left spinning, trying to make sense of it all. What did I do? Did I say something wrong? Was it me? But it wasn't you. It was a complex. Carl Jung defined a complex as a fragmented cluster of memory and emotion, an autonomous force within the unconscious. And when a person becomes possessed by one of these fragments, they don't respond to the moment they're in. They react to a ghost from their past. You say something innocent, and they hear an old betrayal. You show affection, and they feel invaded. You make a joke, and they hear a childhood wound being reopened, and suddenly you're not you anymore. You've become someone else in their story, an old wound, a memory, a symbol of something they never healed. Jung wrote, "The complex behaves like a partial personality, which appears to the ego as something alien, a disturbing intruder." And that's exactly what it feels like to be near someone ruled by a complex. You never know who you're going to get. The loving version? Or the one that shuts you out, the kind version? Or the one that cuts you with words that don't match the moment? And in the confusion, you adapt. You start walking on eggshells. You avoid certain topics. You shrink, adjust, tiptoe, just to avoid triggering that unpredictable storm. But storms don't ask for permission. And the more you try to control the weather, the more you lose yourself in it. You begin to confuse emotional instability with depth. You tell yourself, they're just sensitive. They didn't mean it. They had a hard past. And maybe they did. But the pain they're carrying, it's not yours to fix. The problem isn't their trauma. It's that their trauma is running the show. And when a person has not integrated their complex, they become a puppet of their own past, and you become a casualty of their unconscious war. One moment you're the beloved, the next the betrayer, the next the savior, the next the threat. And all you're trying to do, is love them. But love isn't enough, not when someone's inner child is holding the steering wheel. The hardest part? They're not pretending. They genuinely don't understand why they explode, why they panic, why they push you away, because to them it feels real. The pain, the fear, the rage, it all floods in and takes over. And you, standing in front of them, become the screen onto which all of it is projected. You want to help, but in trying to rescue them, you start to abandon yourself. You ignore your own needs. You bury your own feelings. You accept things no one should ever have to accept, all in the name of understanding. But here's the truth Jung left us with. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And when someone refuses to make their darkness conscious, you will live inside their storm until you remember. You were not born to be a lightning rod for someone else's thunder. You can love someone and still walk away. You can understand their trauma and still protect your peace. You can be compassionate without becoming collateral. Because there is a difference between emotional depth and emotional chaos, and when chaos is disguised as connection, you don't just lose clarity, you lose your center. But the most silent destruction, it doesn't come from those who explode. It comes from those who attach, who cling, who smile, while draining you of everything you are. In part 7, we'll meet the most subtle and spiritually suffocating archetype of all, the psychic vampire. They don't yell, they don't criticize, they don't lash out. They need you, they lean on you, they turn to you, they call it connection, intimacy, love. But beneath the affection is a hunger, a deep, bottomless hunger for your energy, your time, your emotional oxygen. They don't want to hurt you, they just don't know how to exist without feeding off of someone else. Carl Jung didn't use the term psychic vampire, but he described it clearly as the unresolved symbiotic bond, a relationship where two people don't truly see each other as separate beings, but as extensions of each other's unmet needs. You feel responsible for their moods. Their well-being becomes your daily weather, and when they're low, you feel obligated to fix them, even if you're falling apart yourself. It starts with empathy, then it turns into sacrifice. Eventually it becomes self-erasure. And still, they're never full. You give advice, they need more comfort. You stay up all night, they still feel alone. You neglect yourself to be there for them. And somehow, they still end up feeling like you're not doing enough. Because here's the truth. You could give them your whole soul, and it still wouldn't be enough, not because they're evil, but because they are unwilling to face the void within themselves. So they reach for you, not as a partner in growth, but as a psychic battery. You think you're helping, but you're actually being consumed. And the scariest part? They often look like the sweetest people. They're soft, affectionate, gentle. That's the trap. Because when the need is disguised as love, you won't see it as possession. You'll see it as intimacy, but you'll feel it in your body, in your mind. In the quiet exhaustion that creeps in after every interaction, Jung spoke often about the danger of psychic enmeshment, where boundaries disappear and the self dissolves. In these entangled relationships, there's no space to breathe. You start to lose track of who you are, what you want, where you end and where they begin. You start to feel selfish for needing space, cold for wanting time alone, cruel for saying no. But here's the brutal truth. You are not selfish. You are being manipulated by their dependence. Because the psychic vampire doesn't just crave your love, they crave access to your inner world. And once they have it, they won't let go easily. They'll make you feel guilty for pulling back, ashamed for putting up boundaries, unloving for protecting your own soul. And all of this happens silently. No shouting, no violence, just a slow fading of your life force, drip by drip, day by day. And unless you wake up to it, you'll call it love. You'll think it's normal. You'll think you're the problem. But Jung taught that real love is born between two whole individuals, not between two fragmented psyches feeding on each other. True connection doesn't require your sacrifice. It requires your presence. And presence can't survive in an atmosphere where your needs are always an inconvenience. So ask yourself, are you nurturing someone or keeping them alive at the expense of your own vitality? Because if your peace has disappeared, your joy has faded, and your selfhood has collapsed into someone else's needs, you are not in love. You are being fed upon, and the only way out is to reclaim your boundaries, to let their hunger be theirs, to let the silence grow between you, even if it terrifies them, because until they face their own void, nothing you give will ever be enough. And maybe, just maybe, this script has been about them all along. But what if one of these archetypes is also living in you? It's easy to point the finger, to see the manipulators, the masks, the projections. But what if the unconscious force draining your spirit is you? What if the exhaustion isn't just from carrying others, but from carrying a version of yourself you no longer recognize? Carl Jung taught that the unconscious is not just where we store trauma, it's where we store truths we don't want to face, the parts of us we've exiled, the manipulator who pretends to be selfless, the performer who needs constant praise, the judge who can't tolerate others' freedom, the child who still expects the world to rescue them. They're all in there. And if you haven't made peace with them, they're driving your life from the shadows. You think you're exhausted from giving too much to others? Maybe you're exhausted from betraying yourself. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you apologize for your needs, every time you shrink to stay loved, you are draining your own spirit. And then you look outside and say they're toxic, but the truth, sometimes the toxicity is internalized. Jung wrote, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." That partner who manipulates, they mirror the part of you that suppresses, that friend who oversteps. They echo the version of you that lacks boundaries, that family member who controls. They reflect the part of you still trying to control your own pain by fixing everyone else. This isn't about shame, it's about awakening. Because the moment you realize you've been a host to your own unconscious, you also realize you can stop being one. But that requires the most brutal kind of honesty, not with others, with yourself. Ask, where am I using empathy to avoid confrontation? Where am I playing the victim to escape responsibility? Where am I hiding behind perfection to avoid intimacy? Where am I consuming others' energy because I refuse to face my own emptiness? These questions cut deep. They expose the ego, but they also liberate the soul. Because once you see the pattern, you can break it. Once you recognize the projection, you can reclaim it. Once you make the unconscious conscious, you become whole. And that's what Jung meant by individuation. Not becoming perfect, not becoming untouchable, but becoming real, integrated, centered, capable of facing yourself, and therefore no longer afraid of others. But make no mistake, this work is not a single epiphany. It's a daily discipline, a lifetime practice of inner excavation. And it starts with the decision to stop outsourcing your pain, because no one is coming to save you. But maybe you don't need saving. Maybe you just need to stop playing roles you didn't choose and reclaim the voice that's been whispering beneath the noise. In the next part, we'll bring this full circle, because once you see the pattern in others and in yourself, the question becomes, now what? You've been drained, manipulated, confused, gaslit, not always by monsters, sometimes by lovers, sometimes by family, sometimes by your own hands. But now you see it, and that seeing, that clarity, it's the beginning of freedom. Carl Jung didn't offer escape. He offered integration. He didn't teach us how to fight the world. He taught us how to stop abandoning ourselves to it. Because the problem was never that others had too much power. It's that you gave yours away. Every time you absorbed someone else's guilt, every time you tried to fix what was never yours to heal, every time you silenced your instincts to avoid conflict, you left your center. And now the way home is simple, but brutal. You must return. Return to your body. Return to your truth. Return to the parts of yourself that you've been told were too much, too messy, too selfish, too intense. Reclaim them. All of them. Because your wholeness was never about pleasing others. It was about facing the storm, inside, and standing anyway. So how do you do that? You start by watching the subtle contractions. When you feel like you're responsible for how someone else feels, pause. When you catch yourself explaining your pain to someone who isn't listening, pause. When you feel drained after being with someone, not physically but existentially, pause and ask, is this mine? Is this sadness mine? Is this guilt mine? Is this obligation mine? If the answer is no, let it fall, even if it's painful, even if you lose people, even if your voice shakes while reclaiming it, because no relationship is worth losing yourself over. And here's the paradox Jung knew too well. The moment you stop trying to be what others need you to be, you finally become someone worth knowing, real, grounded, whole, someone who doesn't love from guilt, who doesn't serve from emptiness, who doesn't confuse empathy with self-erasure. You stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even hand you a bandage, and you begin to live from a place that cannot be drained, because it's no longer performing, it's being, and yes, it will. Be lonely at first. The manipulative won't understand. The masked will feel threatened. The dependent will call you selfish, but that's not your burden to carry anymore, because now you see. You were never here to be a sponge for unconscious pain. You are here to be a mirror for truth, a vessel for wholeness, a light that does not dim itself for comfort, and that kind of presence, it heals what manipulation cannot. It restores what repression steals. It liberates not just you, but everyone brave enough to meet you there. And if you've made it this far, you're already walking that path. In the final part, I'll leave you with something personal and necessary, a message for anyone who's been carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to hold. Hey, if you've been feeling stuck in emotional loops, trapped in patterns that repeat like a cruel echo, if you've been giving and still feeling unseen, if your life has become a quiet performance, a survival act, just to keep the peace, I need you to hear this. You're not crazy, you're not broken, and knows it's not just in your head. You're carrying too much, and not all of it is yours. Some of it belongs to the mother who never faced her pain, to the partner who projected their wounds, to the friend who called you selfish for having needs of your own, to the child you once were, who learned love meant sacrifice. But that version of you, the one who survives by pleasing, who holds space for everyone but themselves, who smiles while quietly collapsing inside, that version has earned rest. And no, you don't need permission to stop explaining, to stop rescuing, to stop being who others need you to be. You are allowed to come home to yourself, to your truth, to your center, to the parts of you that were told they were too much or not enough. And if you don't know where to begin, if you feel the ache but can't name the wound, if you want to step out of these unconscious dynamics but don't know how, then listen closely. This guide we've put together dives deep into exactly that. It'll help you understand why certain patterns keep repeating, face the hidden parts of yourself you've been avoiding, begin real emotional healing and self-integration. Reconnect with your true undiluted self, because until you do, the manipulations will keep happening, the patterns will keep looping, and you'll keep wondering what's wrong with you, when the real problem is that you've forgotten how to protect your own soul. But it's not too late, and you're not alone in this. Check the first pinned comment under this video. It might be exactly what your soul has been needing. No pressure, no rush, just when you're ready. This is the end of the video, but not the end of your path. Integration is not a single act. It's a way of being, a devotion to becoming whole again. And you, listening right now, you've already begun. Stay with it. Stay with you. The shadows won't stand a chance. If this video helped you in any way, leave a like and watch the video that's showing up here on the screen. It might help you even more.